All right, we are recording. So hello, everyone. This is the Sig Docs weekly meeting for Kubernetes. Today is, I'm pretty sure, Tuesday, October 24th. Casual examination of my screen doc confirms that. Yes, if you were looking for docs, you are in the right place, especially a discussion about them. Do we have any new attendees today? Anybody who's new to the SIG?
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Yeah. This is Peter Dow, and I didn't attend the Sig Docs meeting in the past, and this is my first time to join the meeting. Yeah.
Great. Well, welcome, Peter. We're glad to have you.
Thanks.
Yeah, Peter's actually been a long-time contributor, so it's good to actually hear your voice.
Yeah. Yes.
Changes on GitHub.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, it's I've seen your contributions all over through the repo. It's nice to actually get to talk to you in person.
Okay.
So moving on to doc sprints for KubeCon. Jared, are you in here? Do you want to say anything about that? I do not see Jared. Okay, so I talked to Jared about doc sprints at KubeCon yesterday, and he pointed out that we're going to have two rooms, so it would be ideal to run two different sprints. And the ones that came in at the, oh, hooray! Yay, thanks, Brad, for signing up for doc sprints with your registration. So the doc sprints that Jared and I talked about doing yesterday were doc sprints for better user journeys and doc sprint for the glossary and for adding terms to the glossary. So we will split those up into different rooms and do one user sprint for, or user sprint, I English for a living. We will do one doc sprint for user journeys in one room and glossary sprint in the other. So Andrew,
For the user journeys, what did you guys have in mind? Because we're still working on like the initial MVPs, so, or were you looking at me to like figure that out?
So we didn't talk about anything specific because the MVP is still very much in process. Is that a reasonable thing? Do you think it's reasonable to set that as a goal for a sprint, or would you rather we like no?
We should at least outline it because Jennifer has been working on the application developer one, and Joe has been, or Joseph, yeah, has been working on like the cluster operator, and Luke, who's on right now, also has been helping out. So if we can kind of cut it out so that the doc sprints can, like, I don't know, kind of either supplement what they're doing or help augment it. Like, I just don't want to sort of step on the work that they're doing right now. Because the glossary is much more like well-defined, right? Like each person can just write additional terms and edit, and it's fairly self-contained and discrete. But the user journeys, we're still kind of.
Sorry. Hang on one second, Andrew. I'm sorry. If you are not currently speaking right now, could you mute, please? We're getting some really bad echo and feedback in the channel.
Yeah, I think that's better, right? Yeah, yeah. Like I said, the glossary stuff, it's pretty straightforward because they can just like discretely add individual terms, and that's fine. But the user journeys is since we're still kind of hashing it out, like we don't have the kind of the full framework and recommendations for what people should do just yet. So maybe I should talk with Jennifer and Jessica and Luke and Joe Heck and Steve and like kind of figure out, at least try to create like an outline of discrete things that they can work on at the doc sprint.
Is that going to be is that going to make your lives and the final product for a better user journey, is that going to make it easier or better, or is it going to be a headache and make things worse and more complicated by trying to also frame this in terms of a doc sprint for KubeCon?
I think we just need to have an initial brainstorm of like what they could work on that would be small and discrete. Like I just, at this time, I mean, we could take the time right now to kind of think about it, but I don't have an answer at the moment.
I don't think user journeys is a good thing to try to do in a sprint. I think it's the opposite of what you do in a sprint. It's something that requires some deep, long thought, and it requires thinking about whether you're going to have a journey through existing content or write new content or some combination of those two. And I just don't think it's a fit for a sprint.
Yeah, I think it's a good, no, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, my first thought was basically what Steve just said, but the other thing that I wonder about, just based on where I've got to and haven't got to with the foundational application developer user journey, is if we got pieces of user journeys that we've got in draft well defined. And one of the things you said, Steve, sort of inspired me to think this way. If we had specific pieces of content that need to be refactored to support user journeys, that might be a useful way of allocating doc sprint time. I absolutely agree that like user journeys is too broad. Getting something more specific nailed down, I think, is vital to have it be useful. But if we thought in the planning stages in terms of something that would support the user journeys effort, even if we labeled it somewhat differently. Like right now, I'm still planning refactoring all of the Minikube content because it's all over the place in bits and pieces. And how can we make this, sort of a clearer set of and smaller set of topics that, both point people to a bunch of different resources and then do so, in a more predictable way. There's tons more content like that. And maybe this could also be a place where all of the work that Steve did in his GitHub project to identify refactoring existing content, if we could try to map some of that to what we need for specific user journeys, that might be a nice way of sort of having these two projects intersect. Sorry, that was a whole lot of stuff. I was really just sort of thinking in the moment, but.
No, I think it's well said. Thank you. I totally agree. If we have a framework for what we want people to work on through user journeys, excellent. If we don't think we can have that on time, I do agree that the conceptual work of doing user journeys is not something we want to do during the doc sprint. So this being like a month and a half out, is that something we could have ready? If so, great. If not, then we should pick something else.
I guess I'd be willing to undertake mapping, refactoring work based on Steve's project to the user journey that I'm working on. And like commit to getting something in place by, say, the end of next week, so that if I can't do it, we can then bail and try something else.
Yeah, I agree. If we can have like a drop dead date and then like a plan B, that would be good.
Right. I mean, next week is soon enough so that if I can't somehow wrap my head around an implementation of what I just said with regard to that one user journey, we can proceed to something else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a solid plan. So like a 1 week date. So by like next week's SIG meeting, the 31st, Jennifer, you think that's a reasonable time to like up or down it?
I need next Friday. Sorry, I've got
okay. No, I've
got 3 deadlines for between now and next Tuesday.
Okay, so Friday the 3rd.
Yes, please. I'll report in the Slack channel. And if I can get to it sooner than that, great. I am going to try to get some more of the app developer user journey done this week, but I'm having to really, really squeeze it into bits and pieces of time.
Okay. I'm just thinking about like a possible plan B. Another thing that Jared and I talked about was going through going through the open issue log and like looking at issues that would be like very simple, very well bounded, small enough that bite-sized pieces that would be good to work on in a sprint. And it would be more of a grab bag approach, I guess, to improving documentation, but that might not be a bad way. A bad alternative is just to look at sort of general and ambient improvements to the quality of documentation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to, well, because I showed up late, do we agree that the glossary is also a good project to work on? Okay,
Yes.
Cool. We have 2 rooms, so it makes sense to do 2 projects. I think if our goal is to get better content out of this, then that's then maybe the user journeys or a more in-depth project to work on is better. If the goal is to teach people our workflow and maybe get feedback on, like, say, our contributor guidelines and things like that, maybe throwing a lot of smaller issues at them and then getting feedback on that might be useful. So anyway, thoughts?
So we have the project that's called something like Kubernetes documentation. I put a link to it in the meeting notes that has things, suggested things that people can work on, and they come in small, medium, and large. So I would think we could use that as a place to add any additional things that we think are the right issues to work on. And that could kind of be a home base for where people can find things that they can work on during a doc sprint.
That's also, I like that idea. I like having a ready resource at hand. And Jennifer, yes, you are right. We don't have to just have two projects, and they are one size. They will fit all. It's possible to come with an array of possibilities, but I also feel like that's an easy way to diffuse very quickly and to diffuse energy very quickly. So I'd like to prioritize at least somewhat and have like a top 3 that we're able to field based on attendance and based on where folks are at.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. As you and Jared were speaking, I was thinking, okay, so sort of combing through the issues, that approach is kind of like what we used at Write the Docs earlier this year. And I think that worked well in that context. And if we get a bunch of contributors sort of at that novice level, then that's appropriate. But if we get a bunch of contributors who are either experienced in the Kubernetes documentation or who are Kubernetes devs who know where the content pain points are, then we might want to pivot, offer them something a little bit different.
Right. If Aaron Krickenberger and like Sig Auth walk into the room, able to adjust accordingly.
We should only be so lucky. Yeah.
Okay, so looks like in terms of action, Jennifer, you'll get back to us about scoping some foundational work to support user journeys and give us an up or down by next Friday, the 3rd.
Yeah, that'll be one user journey only.
Sure,
right?
Yeah, that's fine. And we will have a project. How are we going to fill out this project for things to work on? Is that something that we want to think about ambiently? Is that somebody that someone in particular wants to tackle?
I can work on that. I think it should be the same projects that we already have. And we might want some way of marking things in there that we think these are the nice opportunities for the doc sprint. But I don't think we need a separate project. I think we can use that same one. And here's another thought. I like this idea of asking people, the experienced ones, is there something that you've always wanted to add to the doc, something you have a strong feeling about? If so, what is it? And we'll talk to you a little bit about maybe where it would fit and go. Because one thing I've noticed about contributions from people is that if you put a list of things in front of people and say, here's the things we think should be done, you don't get as much traction as if people say, I've got this thing I really want to do. That's when you really get traction.
Sure, and respecting that people come to these sprints with their own motivations and with their own with their own sort of motive force. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, and I think that ties in well with Jennifer's comments around bringing multiple projects that people sort of select. So I like this like flexibility. I think getting feedback from people on like are docs working? What should we do to improve? Like not only the content and what they want to build, but also like what are our gaps now would be really useful. So
I think we want to be careful about how we frame that. In other words, if we invite people to speak in very specific sorts of ways. If I hear one more person say the Kubernetes documentation sucks, well, you know, I did screenshot that tweet about how good it was compared to I forget who else's, and I'll just put that in an auto reply or something. Anyway, I mean, I doubt that we will get people coming into a sprint, preparing to work in a sprint with that kind of sort of splat mentality, but you never know.
Yeah, anger is a powerful motivator, so I'm not going to turn away angry people who want to make the dogs better.
How many people are we expecting, or do we have sort of an estimate or expectation?
We have room for about 40 people across 2 rooms. So I think beyond that number, I actually kept it fairly small. They're like, we can give you a room for 300 people. And I'm like,
no.
300 person doc sprint, what wonders we could accomplish.
What?
Is there any way to contact? Is there a way to contact the people that are interested in doing the sprint ahead of time? Because we could, like, one possibility is say, like, hey, if there's a particular issue you're interested in, like specifically like a GitHub issue or one that they create, and they can bring that in, and we can kind of help them work on it themselves, you know? And then we can tag all the issues with the doc sprint like milestone or something, and that way we can easily find them.
Yeah, let me check. Let me check if we can do that.
That would be awesome. Okay, let's move on from doc sprints, and let's talk about the docs development branch. Is Jordan Liggett with us? I do not see him. Okay. I don't know how much to talk about this if the idea proposer is not here to propose their idea.
I can talk about it a little just to kind of get us all thinking about it.
Sure.
So the proposal is to use our master branch the same way development teams use their master branch, which is new material that's not ready to be published yet gets written in master. And then at some point when you're ready to have a 1.9 release, you cut a 1.9 release branch off a master, and then that becomes your 1.9 release, and it's that branch that Netlify builds our public docs from. So the advantage to this is it would just be more familiar to most of the engineering teams who work that way. They find it backwards that master is where we do continuous improvement, and a side branch is where we put stuff that's going into the next release. So here's the way, if it were going to work, I think it would work this way. Right now, we would only have 2 branches. We would have release 1.8, and our public docs would be presented off of that branch. Any continuous improvement would go into that branch, and that would be the default branch when people open pull requests. Then if somebody has a piece of 1.9 work, they would check it into master, and that is not where we would publish from. So those would be the only 2 branches we would have right now. We don't need a 1.9 branch yet. So we would go forward with that until it's time to publish 1.9, and then we would make a 1.9 branch and switch Netlify over to publishing from that branch.
So is there a chance that people would publish something and then they're expecting it to show up, and then they go, oh, geez, I put it in the wrong place, and crap.
The problem, I think, is with the ambiguity of the name master, because it doesn't really tell you which version you're on. And like, the developers use it as like the current working one, and we use it as, the one that's like the current stable version that's like live on the site. So my problem with it is just like, I'd rather, if we got to do it this way, like I would rather just not use the name master and call it something else so that it's more clear what they're committing to.
Why don't you just call it published? Or like
Because,
live or something.
well, if I understand correctly, master would not be the live branch. Master would be our development branch.
Yeah, and the thing is, the only reason we would do this is to please the people who think of master in a certain way, right? So if we're going to do this to make the engineering teams comfortable, that's the whole point, is that we treat this master branch the same way they do. So I don't think it would make sense to change the name of it.
So what is the percentage of people that you're going to make happy versus the percentage you're going to really confuse? Because usually in the other community service projects I've worked at for docs, when you do master, you're like, hey, the docs are living and I found a mistake and I get an update and woohoo. As of tomorrow, you have real docs that are now corrected. And my fear is we're going to confuse a lot of people doing that, trying to optimize for really smart developers who frankly should be able to figure it out, compared to the rest of us with less experience with the branching and the masters. I don't know. It's popped in my head.
Yeah, I don't sit on one side of this fence or the other. I just, that's just my understanding of what the developers are asking for. I kind of like it the way it is. The one advantage I would see is that right now we have to have 3 branches. We have 1.8, 1.9, and master. And almost on a daily basis, we need to merge master, all the continuous improvement stuff in master, into both 1.8 and 1.9. And we could relieve some of that by, instead of having all 3 of those, just having master and 1.8. Yeah, and then we'd still have to periodically merge master into 1.8 because,
unless you're working on 1.9 content.
No, sorry, and we wouldn't have to do that. It would relieve us of this merging, this daily merging.
Well, but then it's very large merging. So if the next version of 1.8 hits this admin guide, right, and you're doing other stuff on different release, or like, do you only do development on the next branch? Or I don't know, I think keeping off merges for a long time also creates its own issues, especially for documentation, where there's a lot of people working on a lot. Yeah.
So I guess to focus the discussion somewhat, the argument that we have heard so far in favor of adopting this approach, where we develop continuously off of like 1.8 and merge 1.8 into master, is that it would create consistency across all of the different SIGs for development teams. I have not, like, if we adopted this change, would we be resolving or creating technical debt? Let's break that down. Is there any technical debt that we would resolve by adopting this approach?
It's a little less fiddling with multiple branches. There's one less branch to fiddle with.
Okay. Does it create any technical debt?
So I'm not sure about the technical debt question here, but there's a conceptual one that troubles me. So the model that the developers are used to is one that does not, in fact, continuously deploy. You're not continuously deploying improvements to the code base, right? The whole point is you you develop work on master, and then you cut a release and you cut a patch to that release. The whole model for releasing the deliverable based on the relationship between branches is fundamentally different for code than for docs, where we are continuously improving the content, whatever the current version is. We don't worry about porting back. We don't do patches. We don't cut releases. We don't do this continuous development that doesn't ever get deployed. So I'm a little concerned that there's a false equivalency here that's may be at the heart of some of why we're having a hard time talking about this stuff.
So
talking about it.
To take that one step further, if they had higher quality continuous integration tests and quality suites, they would be moving more towards a model of running off of master. So they would move more towards us. We're just able to do it because we can make changes and not fear things are breaking. So does that make sense? Ideally, they should be moving more towards us and be able to run 2 weeks off master, what have you, not do releases if you have a better quality testing suite. Am I going to get killed for saying that? I'm looking around like she's like someone's coming through the back door.
You said it, not me, Brad. I was very careful to talk about the docs funnel.
CF Linux
I do work on the conformance test
for really important projects, but I'm not familiar with a line item for Hitmen, so I think we're good.
But in theory, so they should be moving less. Ideally, they're moving more towards us as us moving towards them. That would.
I'm also there is a piece of technical debt that I can see being created, which is right now on on individual pages for documentation, we have a link for opening an issue in the repo for a particular page of documentation, saying, "Is there an error?" It goes. You can click the button and it goes to the open an issue. I mean, that is an implementation change right there that we would have to make, and we would have to figure out how to do that across multiple versions once we start cutting different release branches. If we take the approach of developing continuously in 1.8, merging into master, taking that approach, it's not a huge piece of technical debt. It's just a fiddly bit, but. I mean, it is a fiddly bit that we would have to change. It
sounds to me like most of us like it the way it is. I think if Jordan Liggett wants to come to one of our meetings and present his case, we should hear him out. But since he's not here today, it sounds like most of us are leaning towards leaving it the way it is.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not really hearing any dissent. I'm just hearing different concurrence that. The way it is technically sound. It works well. And there's not a compelling reason to change it. So,
but let's let Jordan or whoever wants to present do that, and keep an open mind.
Absolutely, and I'm happy to take this to take the discussion into the Sig Docs channel on Slack and say, hey, we talked about this. This is where our discussion went. If you want to talk more about it, we are absolutely happy to hear your case and hear what you have to say about it. But otherwise, the way we do it works fine. Okay, so that is Docs development branch. I'm just looking at where we are for time.
Well, there was still the issue of having too many syncing the branches up. I mean, I think we don't have to sync master with say 1.8 every day. I mean, maybe we should just wait to do a sync when 1.9 is about to go out. Because 1.8 isn't really live anywhere, master is. So we don't, I mean, you could just reduce the daily overhead by just not doing that sync until the next one is ready to go out.
The additional benefit to that is that once we get translation rolling, if we get people who are interested in doing other translations, having a stable release branch that we only merge master into that release branch, having a for lack of a better term, a frozen release makes translation a lot easier because there's not a daily merge against content or a weekly merge even. If we only update a release branch when the next release is about to go out. I mean, that's kind of, it just makes translation a lot easier if that release is actually frozen.
All right, I'm getting kicked out here. I'll talk to you guys later.
Okay.
Thanks, Andrew.
All
right. So let's move on from Docs development branches onto the monthly 404 update. So Andrew and I took a look at the site console for site 404s last week. And initially we looked at the numbers and it seemed really high. The month after we started doing deployments to Netlify for September, the number of 404s was 400 and something. And we looked at it again for this month for October, and it was around 324. And that was, we were concerned about that because that number shouldn't be that high. But as we started looking at the actual 404s themselves, at the URLs, like where the source URL was coming from, the actual formation of the URLs, it turns out that we're in a much better place with Site 404s. What we were seeing was a lot of bot crawls in different forms. We were seeing like some Go engine was constructing URLs and trying to ping the site. We were getting crawlers that were crawling text files through they weren't even crawling the website, they were crawling the repo, taking anything that looked like it might be formable as a URL and trying to submit it against the site. So things like URLs in the humans.txt file, the robots.txt file, basically bots were crawling any available, any visible file, taking things that looked like valid URLs and submitting them against the site. So the actual number of 404s was like what we would consider these things need a redirect was very low. It was less than 20. And that is a vast improvement over previous months. So even though the actual number of 404s was high, the actual number of redirects required was significantly lower. So I think the site health is really good. And the Netlify improvements to deployment are making a huge difference in that. So awesome sauce. Okay, moving on to translation efforts. So after talking with Jared a little bit yesterday, and after working on translation efforts for about a month and a half, it's really clear that translation is translation is a giant project, and it has the ability to devour as many resources as we can throw at it. It is just a hungry mouth, and the way it could easily eat all of the attention that we could give it, and it's not going to be the best use of our time or focus as a SIG. And I think the thing that's going to be most valuable for us to focus on is a prototype for a translation process. What an actual like setting expectations for, all right, if you are interested in doing a translation, these are the expectations that we will set for what a translation team does, benchmarks that they have to meet in order to have that translation published, and just level expectations for what an actual good, healthy translation process looks like, rather than trying to actually shepherd the Chinese translation process through to its end, because that's more work than we can reasonably commit to doing.
Yeah,
so,
just to add on a bit, yeah. Translation and internationalization and localization is something that companies will throw millions of dollars at, and staff appropriately with people who know the local language and can shepherd content through that process. I think we have the capacity to succeed at what you've described, Zach, when it comes to creating the contribution and maintenance process and prototype that. But when it comes to actually staffing that effort, we don't have the expertise in this group. And maybe that's something we work with CNCF. There's a different SIG that gets set up to work on that. But we I worry that we'll be translating content while focusing less and less and less on actually creating good content in the language that we all understand. So I can see this just eating us as a group. So I want to make sure that we have, what you've defined.
So what work has it caused us to have the Chinese translation effort going on? I mean, the only work it has caused me is that the Chinese translators find mistakes in the English document, and they submit many, many pull requests with small typo fixes and things like that. So what are the other tasks that come our way because of translation?
Andrew, I see you're back. I don't know if you have been back enough to, I don't know where you came back in the conversation. I think you can talk more about some of the scope of the work that that has been involved in just getting a translation team to a point where they can contribute, what we've been asking of them, setting expectations. I can give a little bit of an update, but I think you could give a better one.
Yeah,
you want to talk
sure.
about that a little?
So it's really just sort of getting them in a place where they're self-sufficient, right? And one of the tasks is moving their existing repo into the Kubernetes org, because there's one that they created called like Kate's Meetup or whatever, where they basically are copying our docs content and translating it before they then submit it back to the repo. So the CNCF wanted that stuff moved into the Kubernetes org in GitHub, so we're in the process of that. And it's not a lot of overhead on my part. I just had to get the permissions and clear out the repo where it's moving to and stuff. And then we have like a monthly sync. But after that's done, it shouldn't be that much ongoing overhead, I don't think. And we can tell them to stop submitting these small typo requests and just have them focus on the translation.
I think that'd be reasonable to say that fixing the English document is a non-goal of translation. That really does overwhelm us, and we will get to those kind of fixes as we have time. So yeah, I think that's at least a possibility, is to say here's the process is to translate, but not to fix the English docs as you go.
Yeah, because that's one of the point of the monthly syncs, is to be able to communicate with them, to tell them well, we don't need you to do this, or or whatever, and just make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes.
I think where the real overhead is I mean, Andrew, you point out that this stuff is, it's not a huge burden, but where it is a large burden to be figuring all of this out. And some of this we would have to figure out for any translation project. But like Jared pointed out, none of us have the expertise to do this effectively. None of us have any real experience or history working on large-scale internationalization projects before. So
I think there's also a concern of mine there's been a lot of talk of how are we going to onboard the next 5 languages? And I'm like, So it's that sort of thing terrifies me, where it's it might not be a lot of work now to do Chinese, but imagine managing 5 different other communities doing other languages. I'm like, whoa.
Right.
That requires team effort.
And I'm sorry, Brad, you look like you wanted to say something.
Well, no, I did have experience with this in another open source community project. We used a tool, I think it was called Zanata. But the basic model is you got to have a whole separate team that's basically crowdsourced. We can't take this on ourselves. You maybe put in the things in place so that basically what happens every time one of us makes a change to our docs and we're ready to merge in the master in English, there's a model where you send it over, the little changes one by one, and they all get queued up in this other system like Zanata, and then you crowdsource that where they're you have that separate team doing it. And there is a nice wiki page. I can go dig up the link where this other community source did do this, and they were able to make it work, but it is a lot of resources, and it's not on this team. It's a lot of resources run by a whole nother person running that whole crowdsourcing effort, if that makes any sense. So it can be done, but it's a huge commitment. Now, it does help. I remember with IBM, we donated a whole bunch of translations because we did have a whole bunch of them. But ideally, what takes over is this crowdsourcing model and teeny tiny little translations, as opposed to an enterprise company at IBM. For a product, we typically would say bring in all the translators twice a year for each release. And that model actually is pretty dinosaurish compared to what you can do in crowdsourcing. It's just so much work to get all that set up, investigate Sonata and all that stuff. So it can be done. We'd have to, get more folks, right? I mean, you could do the one-off for Chinese, and that might be your sweet spot. But if we ever get serious about it, there are some places we can look and see how they did it. But yeah, boy, a lot of work.
Yeah, we really need to engage CNCF and the community SIG to see like how the hell we would do this. I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I don't think it's good to know that you know how to do this. But the people who know how to do this, when I describe the situation to them, they look really scared.
I put this in chat too. I'm just going to second what Brad said. You do it with a dedicated team. You don't do it with the resources that we have available. End of story.
Well, how badly does CNCF want this? Because it sounds like the resources are going to have to come from them, right?
That's a great question for them, and that is the next step in discussion going forward, is to talk with them and ask, like, I need to have a conversation with Dan Kahn saying, what is driving this? What is the goal? What is the driver? Because I don't know right now, and that's something that I think we all need clarity about, and also being clear that whatever process we adopt cannot overwhelm us the way that the sort of avalanche of small improvement PRs has overwhelmed it. It has gotten better, but I mean, I remember, like, Andrew, where you and I and Steve were closing like 75 PRs every 2 days. It was a little nuts, and I don't want to go back there. Just like thinking about what is actionable out of this conversation. I am going to have a conversation with Dan Kahn about what is driving it from the CNCF side. What is driving specifically what's the driver for the Chinese translation project? I think we need to just continue, I think, what we are already doing, Andrew, but also set expectations that we are not going to drive the process through to the end on our side. We just need to set expectations about what those milestones look like in order to, like, before we add a language translation to a language selector, we need to have like X percentage of documentation translated. Here are the essential pieces. We just need to focus on setting expectations for what this translation and any translation needs to do as an MVP. Anything else to say about translation before we move on? I want to leave Jessica enough time to do part 2 of her demo.
There's a little bit less of the demo this time around, so if you want to keep talking, that's fine too.
Okay. Great. Let's see, move on from translation. Let's see, Kubernetes version requirements for tasks and tutorials in 1.8 docs. I do not see, I don't know who added this. So person who added the discussion for Kubernetes version requirements.
That's me.
So
can you present, Zach, and hit that link of where it says example, right below there. Right below the agenda item.
Yep.
So the question is, if someone is reading the 1.8 docs and they're going through some sort of task or tutorial where we're having them do steps, is one of the prerequisites that their underlying Kubernetes cluster be running Kubernetes 1.8, or should that be kind of our default? So as you scroll down this, let's look at prerequisites. It's where it says before you begin. It says you need to have a Kubernetes cluster. It doesn't say you need to have a 1.8 Kubernetes cluster, right? So right now, this is all we say. So we go down a little bit to the YAML file. And the first line in the YAML file, someone thinking they were doing the right thing, changed this API version to apps v1 beta 2, which is, it's a 1.8 thing. If you don't have a 1.8 cluster, this YAML file will fail. I mean, the next step, so scroll down a little bit to the next step, where we see kube control apply, and then we name this YAML file. Well, if you don't have a 1.8 cluster, this step will fail. In fact, right, I just started up a container engine cluster this morning, and even today it comes up with a 1.7 cluster. And so if I run this command by just doing that, very simple, give me the default container engine cluster, this command fails. So we need to decide, up in our, in general, in our prerequisites, if someone's reading the 1.8 docs, do we want to say, you must have a cluster and it must be running Kubernetes 1.8? Or do we want to be more relaxed about this, in which case we might use the older version of the YAML file, or we might have tabbed instructions for 1.8 and versions less than 1.8. So we don't have to answer this right now, but I just want to put this out for people to think about. What are we saying with our prerequisites in a given doc set?
That is a really good point. And it's also it's easily extensible to, to anything that looks like a tutorial or any sort of procedural content.
Yeah.
Is specifying a needed version or providing options for versions. I don't know. I am super in favor of being as specific as possible about requirements. I can't imagine leaving this content as is, knowing what we know about it now.
No, we can't leave it as it is. We either have to give them an option here at kube control apply, or we have to go into the prerequisites and say you must have a 1.8 cluster, one or the other. I kind of lead towards giving them an option. I don't think we want to require everyone who reads the 1.8 docs to be running a 1.8 cluster.
Well, that raises an interesting question, though. Is like, how do we? It raises the versioning question: is how do we version content appropriately to have potentially multiple versions of the same content available, depending on what version a user is looking at.
Yeah, it's usually not an issue, because the reason it's an issue this time is because they made a big change with the deployment resource. They put it into a new version and possibly even a new API group. But anyway, it's different. They made a substantial change, and that's why in this one case it fails. In most cases, it won't be a problem, but we do need to have some policy for these cases where it makes a difference.
Agreed.
So it may be that we don't want to take too much time with this right now, so we can get to the rest of our agenda. But maybe we can revisit this after people have had a chance to think about it some.
Yeah, it is a much larger question about versioning content. Yeah, let's do research. Let's revisit this next week and plan to dedicate some time to it, because it's not a small question, and it is one that we need to address sooner rather than later. So let's come back to this next week. Thank you for raising this, Steve. This is really good. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
I think most of my updates are just text, or not text, but like words rather than demonstrating.
Okay.
So basically, I was working on it this morning, and I'm almost done with the Ruby plugin, but it's not completely working yet, and I would have to make sure that the CSS and JavaScript is okay. I guess the one question that I want to raise is that I haven't checked, but I suspect that this is going to slow down the build time for the site. And I'm wondering, as we start to, are we trying, I'm worried that there are these neat features that we can add, this parser plugin, but at a certain point, are we going to overload Jekyll and be extending it to the point where like with all the content that we have, building it might take like, I don't know how long it takes now, but when I build it locally, I have to sit around and like go to another tab and do some other stuff and then come back to it. I'm just like wondering if the stuff I'm working on might make that worse, and whether we should be talking about that sooner rather than later. And then also related to that, on the glossary page, right now it loads fine, but I imagine as we add more and more words, it's literally just all HTML on that page. So I don't know. I haven't tried to like optimize the site before, but I'm just worried that that might also become slower with time. So just things to raise if anyone has experience or ideas about this. Otherwise, it's just me having a caveat right now.
I mean, I guess we'll find out after the doc sprint in KubeCon.
Fair enough. Yeah, it'll be interesting to refresh that page and see how long it takes to load. Okay.
That would be, does anybody have a site tool that they especially like for metrics for like page load time? Do we have access to those kinds of metrics already?
Jekyll actually has, I was looking into this, and Jekyll has a built-in version. So I think like if worst comes to worst, we can identify the pages that really need to get fixed. I think like the worst one's like 35 seconds, which is not too, but like they get called multiple times. So like, actually I will follow up and like link the command that I use to this group, or the Slack group, so that you can run it yourselves and see. Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds cool. Anything else for us, Jessica?
I will try to have a, well, I'll try to have a PR out by next week so that people can poke around and look at it.
Awesome.
Thanks.
All right.
Hey, Zach, can we jump back for a second to the glossary thing for the doc sprint?
Sure.
Because there was an issue I added that had like a list of additional terms we should add, but I just want to mention, if other people have thoughts of what other key like concept or terms that we should add, they should add it to that issue. And that way we'll have sort of a list for people that they can work on at the doc sprint.
Do you have a link to that issue, Andrew?
Yeah, let me find it real quick.
Yeah, that sounds like an excellent idea. Yeah, it would be, makes a lot of sense to consolidate all of that all work related to that issue in a single place. Okay, so I tell you what, let's put that, Andrew, if you want to send that link on Slack, I will add it to the meeting notes so that they're available. And that way we can get like 6 minutes back of the day. All right, anything else for the agenda? All right, 3, 2, 1. That's a SIG meeting. Thanks, everybody. Really good discussion today. Right. It's issue 5993. I got it. Thanks, Andrew.